And for more on the first year of Francis's papacy, I am joined by Elena Procario-Foley. She, the chair of the Religious Studies Department at Iona College. Thank you so much for a few minutes. And I'm thinking back to when we spoke. We spoke before the convocation here, and it's been amazing.
Yes.
What has happened in a year's time. And, you know, from a laity perspective, I don't think a lot of people, and the polls seem to bear this out, expected that there would be as much change, even if it's anecdotal, but if there's as much change, at least both in symbolism and I think just in the face of the church than we've seen in the past year from this pontiff.
Well, you used a key word there, symbol. And several commentators, Catholic journalists have written that in a sacramental church, symbol is substance. And so in that sense, we can say there's change, but what's the substance of the change? And I would first say tone, and that tone is everything. We know that with our kids, we know that in the classroom, we know that in politics. And the same is true in the church. So Francis, first of all, reminds everyone, well, people of a certain age, of Pope John the 23rd. His tone changed things in the church at 50 years ago. We're in the 50th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. And he said things remarkably similar, or Francis is saying things remarkably similar to what he said. So I think, first of all, it's just that tone. It is not the condemnatory tone of the pre-Vatican II church. That's one of the things with John the 23rd, and people who were concerned about losing the gains of Vatican II, which have been analyzed in terms of tone, have said that since Francis has taken office, we have less of the condemnatory tone that we did under some 30 years of John Paul II and Benedict XVI. For all of their wonderful things that they did, this tone is different. This tone is looking out again. It's less defensive.
There feels to be more of a humility that's attached to this papacy, and also even some of the language that so many people, you know, that maybe aren't as vested as you and I in the church, that'll maybe go Easter, maybe go Christmas, and sometimes not even that, feel that they're not welcomed, and feel that, as you said, they're condemned before they even walk through the door, not welcomed. That's changed. I think even how, you know, when asked about homosexualities and their place in the church, etc., the language at least he showed. Now, has there been change in doctrine? No. But the point is, the polls seem to reflect it. The people feel that the church may be for them. Now, we haven't seen the numbers change in terms of who's coming into the pews.
Right, right.
Do you think that's a matter of time, or does the church still need to go farther to make sure that people feel welcomed?
Yes and yes. More time. People need to feel welcome. There's been, when exclusive language is used for a long period of time, you cannot help but feel excluded. And so I think you're absolutely right. The tone is different, the poll numbers haven't changed, but you hear people saying things like, I'm not going back yet, but I like what I'm hearing. And that's important. Why? Because people are listening, they're not tuning out. So the Pope speaks now, they're listening more than the people who are invested, right? Or more people other than those who are invested, excuse me. Whereas before it might be, oh, there's another same old tone, same old message. So we have to wait to see. I think we need a lot of time. We're going to look at what he's doing with structures and tone, and then we'll see how and when certain particular changes in stances of the church might change.
I don't know about yourself, but I always grew up that the church feed the hungry, clothe the naked. And some of the most generous people on the planet that I ever met were people not just of the cloth, but the sisters who would do things and go to places, to society that forgot. If you closed your eyes, though, so often the liturgies were about abortion and the war and the fight over reproduction. And I understand the church's position. I don't think anyone expects they're going to change on this. But it seemed like Sunday was a political battlefield too often. And now when you hear the Pope talk about economic inequality or whatever else, it's amazing to me how many people are surprised by it, but that's what the church always had stood for. We just didn't hear enough of that coming out of Rome.
You're absolutely right. No, well, except for that last piece. We did hear about it coming from Rome. In America, we have that culture war context, which changed things, and you have to understand the culture war context. Those who wanted to keep the focus on the hot button issues, well, you have to look at the political spectrum of the lay people, the journalists in the church, so, you know, right to left. So those who had an ear in the media on the culture wars on the right, that's what people were hearing. So that's why I think you just said that. But from the church, it's been a consistent message, especially since 1891 with Leo XIII, Pope Leo XIII, who wrote an encyclical that started the Catholic social teaching. And he's talking about the right of people to organize unions, because work is dignity and it's part of human dignity, and people should have that right to collectively bargain. So there's been a consistent message. The interesting thing, as with everything, is which sector of the church listens to which message. All right. So we have to look at a consistent teaching. And however, certain things under John Paul II and Benedict did come through to your local bishops more clearly than others. So Benedict wrote an extraordinary encyclical on the economy. It came out late because of the crash in '08 and all of that, and he wanted to get it right, and he consulted with economists. And he said things in a very different way from Francis. So people who saw what he was saying about trickle-down economics and rampant capitalism, unfettered capitalism, they didn't want to hear that. You know, certain Catholics didn't want to hear that because that didn't fit with their secular political agenda, right? Other people heard it and said, this is it.
I don't think it's a little bit more because this particular pope has chosen his spots, has chosen not to wear the Ferragamo shoes, and chosen to make this. And, you know, frankly, when you went to church before, in the Missalettes or even in the Catholic New York, it was always abortion was on the front page, no matter what you turned about whatever, you know, potluck dinner to raise money for whatever funds.
Right.
This is more this. He's chosen, I think, very strategically and I think effectively, symbols to say that you've been marginalized, I want you back in the fold. You matter too here. You may have felt in the past that you haven't mattered enough. Women's role in the church. Now, nothing has changed. No one believes in their future women are going to be in the priesthood, no matter what the laity has to say about it. But he's making overtures to say, unlike you know, what happened before, that we're listening to you. And that isn't just symbols, is it? Or is it?
Well, in a good Catholic tradition, symbols are everything, right? They reflect a greater reality. And so I think you're right. No, I think you're absolutely right. The shoes, eschewing the greater medieval dress that Benedict used to try to focus on the sacrality of the church. The used car that he got from another priest somewhere in northern Italy, I think.
The apartment, the whole bit.
Yes, the guest house living, all of that. It's well, it's not exactly St. Francis, but in our contemporary moment, that's as close as he can get. He can't, you know, go without his shoes.
Something more tangible that you can speak to is the Curia right now. He is shaking things up. I know that's inside baseball, but the amount of not only abuse of power that was going on, malfeasance of funds that happened under the last pontiff, and even before that, he's clearing out a lot of folks here that were attached to the old guard versus the new guard.
Oh, that's right. With the cardinals that he's just elevated, I don't think there's any from the Curia. There might have been one. But so yes, exactly. Cardinals from around the world. It's parallel to, you know, any huge shakeup in the structure of, you know, the U.S. president's cabinet, something like that. He's putting less emphasis on the Vatican bureaucracy or the Curia, as you said, and he's got his own group of 8 advisors from around the world, one of them being a Franciscan, Cardinal Archbishop O'Malley of Boston, but others from around the continent. So he's showing us that it's a world church, whereas Benedict was concerned about the loss of Christianity in Europe. And most of the world's Catholics are, you know, in another hemisphere. And so he's representing that with his appointments, and that will change the way the hierarchy works.
Year from now, if we sit down, beyond the significance of some of the symbolic moves that this pontiff may do, do you think we'll be seeing anything different in the way of doctrine in the church? Or maybe even in the role in some of the unfolding tragedies we're seeing taking place in Syria and other parts of the world here, where in the past the Vatican's become more invested in public affairs and talking about equity and trying to avoid. Will he take a more pronounced role than maybe we've seen in the past?
You mean in world politics?
Yeah.
Kind of the way that John Paul
what
did?
we're seeing
or?
playing out, and whether it be the Ukraine or whether it is certainly being played out right now in Syria, where you're seeing genocide taking place. Where do you think a year from now we'll sit back and say, yeah, the Pope surprised again, he did X or he did Y?
You know, people have talked about how he picks up the phone and cold calls people. I would have no surprise if he's been doing that and talking to leaders and calling countries to account for human rights abuses. So absolutely, I think so. I think he's going to keep taking the church, the vision of pushing people to be with those in need. In the extraordinary interview last August, September, that was published in Jesuit magazine simultaneously around the world, the wonderful image is he said, the church needs to be a field hospital. He said, when someone's on the battlefield hurt, you don't stop and take a medical history. And so in other words, I'm not looking for orthodoxy litmus tests first. I'm looking for where you're hurting. And this is where the church has to be. This is what Jesus did. This is what St. Francis told us Jesus did and lived it out in the Middle Ages. And this is what we have to do. Go to the 99%. The world is where we need to be. We have to engage the world, not be against the world. Christ is in the world, not against or above the world. He told the youth at World Youth Day this summer, go out and make noise in the street. Get that spirit out there.
It has been a fascinating year, and I think for a lot of Catholics, and the polls, as I said, have bared this out. It has been a hopeful one, and let's hope the next year doubles down, if you will.
I
Elena,
think so.
thank you so much.
Thanks
I
for
really
having me.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.